Welcome back to the show. I'm Natalie Brunell, and joining me this week is Sandy Kaul. She is the head of digital assets at Franklin Templeton. She is also co-chair of the CFTC's Digital Asset Markets Subcommittee, and she was named this year to Forbes 50 over 50 list. Sandy, thank you so much for joining me.
Great. I'm so excited to be here, Natalie. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we've got lots to cover. Bitcoin's price is doing okay right now. It's recovering from the bear market. And obviously, the spot Bitcoin ETFs are on the horizon. But I would love to learn a little bit more about your background. You have a lot of experience with technology and changing and disruptive innovation. So, can you talk to me about how you got to be at Franklin Templeton?
Great, sure. One of the things that's so exciting for me is that I have literally lived through the entire tech revolution that has taken place in the financial services industry. When I started right out of college, I literally started at Shearson Lehman Brothers and was given the first personal computers that they had ever brought into the organization. And I was handed 40 years worth of commodity files, paper files, and my little 5.5-inch disk floppy Lotus 123 program, and was told to enter the data, right? And so to have progressed from there to I'm out here now talking about decentralized networks and smart contracts with self-executing code is really just, it's so exciting because I have literally lived through every one of these iterations. The emergence of email, the emergence of the internet, the emergence of cloud technologies, right? Each of these has profoundly changed the way that investing works. And I have been fortunate enough to be at the forefront of helping shape that, both as someone who's invested in the markets, who's analyzed the markets, and who's consulted and helped to build technologies in the market. So I've had a really fun history where I have a lot of different experiences, and I've been able to kind of pull them all together. And it really helped me to recognize that we're at a very unique moment in time in terms of these new technologies are going to completely reshape the way that financial systems work. It's just so exciting to be able to think that I can be part of reshaping that future.
Well, Franklin Templeton is this legacy institution that's been around since 1947. I know the last time we spoke, you talked about how you have to think generationally. I believe more than 1.5 trillion assets under management. So, can you talk a little bit about the history of Franklin Templeton? And I didn't know this until you shared it with me, but the company began experimenting in this space back in 2017.
Yeah. So one of the really unique things about Franklin Templeton is it's a publicly traded company, but it's also one that the Johnson family established and has helped to run throughout its entire history. So the current CEO is in the role, but so has her brother been in that role, her father, and her grandfather. So it really is, in many ways, like a family office and a publicly traded company. And as a result, they think much more strategically. I like to tell people Franklin Templeton thinks like a sovereign wealth fund in terms of thinking multi generationally. And one thing that the Johnson family has been very focused on, that Jenny is taking that legacy forward, is this idea that you cannot subsist in a business for multiple decades if you are not thinking about where innovation is coming from and how are you realigning your company to be competing around where the world is headed, not where the world is today. Right. And so that has helped Franklin build a 75-year legacy. They were really at the forefront of innovating around money market funds, around government bond funds, and now we're at the forefront of innovating around crypto. And I think that these are going to be areas that really position Franklin Templeton to be a leader in the coming generations as well as today.
So, what was Franklin Templeton doing in this space in 2017? And can you talk about how the company got to a place where it is one of the, I believe, 12 applications for a spot Bitcoin ETF and really does recognize the value that Bitcoin will bring for helping people to be able to save for their futures?
Yeah. So, one of the exciting things for us at Franklin was that we had a CEO who really understood every part of the business. At different points in her tenure with Franklin Templeton, Jenny ran operations, she ran technology. And so she understood that at the heart of what you do in a financial services firm are ledgers, right? Ledgers are everywhere in this organization and in this business. In fact, every investment fund has two ledgers, the ledger with the investments and then the ledger of the shareholders that own the shares in the investments. And so she thought, wow, there's this new ledger technology. Let me experiment and see, could we get some operational cost savings by moving to centralized ledgers versus to moving to decentralized ledgers as opposed to central ledgers that we need to maintain ourselves individually. And so that was the original premise. We picked a money market fund to experiment with because we were our own transfer agent, and therefore we knew that you needed to make adjustments to the ledger every single day in a money market fund because you attribute interest every single day. But what we found is that nobody was there to help us experiment. We had to build our own transfer agent system. We had to build our own wallet system that could align with what the SEC was asking us to look at in terms of right controls. We had to build our ability to trade and to access these markets in a way that was compliant and regulatory based. So what began as a simple question really ended up resulting in us needing to create assets that have allowed us to really learn very deeply how this new space operates. And the more engaged we've become, the deeper our conviction about how important it's going to be to the future has been. So it really just started off from the simple premise of, can we use these new types of blockchain ledgers to get operational efficiency? And now we've built an entire business that really sees the investment potential as well as the technology potential.
It's time for a quick break to hear these messages from my partners who make this podcast possible. First up, Bitcoin 2024, the world's biggest Bitcoin conference, is coming to Nashville next year. Come join us for 3 full days of keynotes, panels, networking events, workshops, concerts, and more. My first ever Bitcoin conference was back in 2021, and that's where I dropped my first episodes of Coin Stories. Not expecting this to become my full-time job. Anything can happen here, especially if you dream of working in the industry. Ticket prices go up every month until the big event, so don't miss out. You want to get your tickets early. Head to b.tc/conference and use the code HODL, HODL, for 10% off. I'll see you in Nashville. Next up, Coinkite, which offers everything you need to safely self-custody your Bitcoin. Coinkite produces the ColdCard Wallet, which is the cold storage device I use for safekeeping my Bitcoin. You can verify the source code, it's ultra secure, and it's easy to use even if you're a beginner. Head to their site in my show notes to find all their custody products, cold cards in different colors, seed phrase plates, tap signers, block clocks, and more, and get a 5% discount using my link. Become your own bank with Bitcoin and Coinkite. Next up, CrowdHealth. Health insurance costs are sky high today, and you send your money every month to a massive corporation, and you never see that money again, even if you don't get sick. Luckily, there's another option, and it's all about community. CrowdHealth brings together Bitcoiners who crowdfund each other's healthcare, so you no longer have to pay fiat health insurance companies. You get to help other Bitcoiners, and they help you in return. So how it works is when someone needs a doctor or hospital visit, CrowdHealth negotiates down the medical bill lower than what insurance would be, and the community helps you fund the costs. You get to save the money you would have sent to insurance, and hey, why not put it into Bitcoin? I'm so glad I made the switch to be part of this community, and now I spend only about $100 a month on healthcare. For more information and to join, head to joincrowdhealth.com/Natalie. Well, let's focus a little bit on Bitcoin for a moment. When did you first learn about it? And there are a lot of people who watch and listen to this who really see it as a source of hope that people will be able to provide for their families and for themselves generations in the future, because it really addresses some of the biggest issues in our financial system, including this gaping wealth inequality. So can you talk to me a little bit about the promise that you see with Bitcoin?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I personally have been on a journey with Bitcoin, and I think a lot of people have been, right? I first heard of it and learned about it back in 2013, 2012, right? And was asked to take a look at it, and it had come to prominence back then. Why? Well, for very negative reasons, because of the Silk Road and because of some of the uses of Bitcoin at the time that were raising regulatory concern. But the technologies it was built on and the premise it was built on were so powerful. And the fact that it was launched without the controls that normally limit the kinds of negative exposure that it had to deal with early in its development, we didn't see that as cause to discount the potential of blockchain, right? Markets develop, any marketplace takes time to develop. Bitcoin was something so new that it made sense that it would have some bobbles in its early development, but that's when we started to track it. And what has been fascinating is exactly what you say. The core premise is one of inclusion. The core premise is one of individual freedoms to give people that access. And that has really played out perhaps much more in other parts of the world where there is more concern about an individual's ability to remain successful within the system, where the governments often take actions that are adverse to their citizens and they need to have that protection and that escape plan that Bitcoin has provided. But I think that even in traditional developed economies, the ease of access, the ability to do direct access, these are all things that really, I think, fit into a lot of the technology trends of the recent years and this idea of individual empowerment through in technology. And Bitcoin really does fulfill that kind of promise where it's not controlled by any central entity. And therefore, there's not going to be this temptation to use it to control behavior. And I think that that's very, very appealing to growing portions of the world population and very important from what it says about the potential to social engineer greater opportunities for people. And a lot of times, people try and do this through programs or they try and do this through incentives, but actually giving people the means to do this themselves is really probably going to be the most effective in the long run.
I saw a recent headline that CEO Jenny Johnson shared that she does have Bitcoin in her portfolio. And it's interesting to see this evolution, right? Where back when you first heard about Bitcoin, there was a lot of nefarious headlines associated with it, to coming to a point where the industry has matured to a level where legacy institutions and investment firms are showing their sign of approval for the space and wanting to be in it. So, is Bitcoin something that Franklin Templeton believes should be in every American's portfolio today?
Well, I mean, one of the real opportunities we see in moving this into an ETF wrapper is that we are able to then more easily get it into other people's portfolios, right? I mean, when you look at it, Bitcoin has been perhaps one of the best performing asset classes of the past decade, certainly, but even of the recent years. Even when you factor in crypto winter, Bitcoin has still been one of the best performing asset classes, period. Right. And so, we believe that having alternative exposures in a portfolio for individuals as well as for institutions provides good diversification. And the better your diversification, the more resilient and robust your risk adjusted returns will be. And therefore, we do believe that if you have the ability to put a allocation, perhaps a very small allocation, but nonetheless an allocation to Bitcoin, that could diversify portfolios and give that type of alternative exposure. But it's been very hard to do, right? Because there hasn't been easy access mechanisms, particularly for the majority of people. And the ETF is a very familiar access mechanism. So, what's exciting about the Bitcoin ETF idea for us is primarily that it's going to bring together this new opportunity space with a vehicle that people are already very comfortable with. And it takes some of that mystery of how do I get Bitcoin exposure out of the equation.
Yeah, and it's a good way to put it. It's packaging it into a familiar wrapper, and that is what ETFs have provided for so many people as far as their investment portfolios. Just kind of curious. I know you can't share too much on the spot Bitcoin ETF applications, but I've had some previous guests on, including Kathy Wood, CEO of ARK Invest, try to speculate as to why one of these hasn't been approved in the past. Some think it's something to do with politics. Others have said maybe Gary Gensler has prevented that. Does your company have any take on why it's taken so long and maybe why that tide is finally turning?
Look, we're a 75-year-old company, right? Bitcoin's only been around for 14 years. I think the regulators have only been considering ETF applications for 5 or 6. In the long run, that's not a very long time, right? Once you put a rule in, once the regulators make a rule, that rule is on the books pretty much forever, right? So the fact that they've tried to move very slowly, I don't want to focus on what the blame is for them having moved slowly. I think that's a regulator's job, is to figure out the right pace. I think many people might have hoped that it would have been a little faster. But what I'd like to focus on is where the future's taking us. And it does look like we're moving closer to having the right regulation in place in the US, and that will open up the opportunity. And, you know, it's the kind of thing like when you're contracting for a house, the contractor never builds it fast enough. But once you're in the house, you kind of forget about all of that because you're happy and you're in the house. So I'm hoping it's going to be more like that, Natalie.
Yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of tailwinds in the coming year, not just the spot Bitcoin ETFs, but also the halving. That's going to be sort of a supply shock, fewer and fewer Bitcoin entering into circulation with each block. And then the FASB rules changing. I think also that has been something prohibitive to companies adopting Bitcoin, putting them in the treasuries. So all of that is changing. And it's, it makes me think of what you said earlier about seeing trends in technology. And I think on our first call, you identified three trends that you've really seen: computers, cryptography, and network technology. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of the journey that's brought us here? Because sometimes when I share educational lessons on Bitcoin, I talk about the decades of research and development that led to this point. It didn't happen in a vacuum where all of a sudden we just get Bitcoin. The technology had to build up in blocks, no pun intended. So can you talk a little bit about those trends that you've witnessed?
Yeah, I mean, it's super fascinating. When you go back and you look at where the roots of all of this came from, really a lot of these technologies that are reshaping the world today started in World War II, when the government and the military really started funding this technology research to be able to enhance the way that US troops were fighting in World War II. And it wasn't just in the US, it was other countries as well contributing. But a lot of that technology was kept for just the military for decades, right? It really wasn't until the 1960s that they started sharing computing technology with commercial enterprises. It wasn't until the mid 1970s that they started sharing the military's advancements in cryptography and public key encryption. And it wasn't really until the 1990s, 1980s and 90s when they started sharing the network technologies that they had been building, where you could send packets of data over networks that were virtual networks, not physically hard line networks. And so all of these technologies kind of originated from the military and from big military funded university efforts. And they slowly worked their way into the public domain. But as they worked their way into the public domain, the commercial instincts of these new organizations that were embracing the technologies took them in very different directions. And that's really where I think you've seen this exciting development of all of the key components that make up the crypto and the new blockchain based ecosystems. They really are the combination of those computing technologies, those cryptography principles and networks. And what's happened is it's almost like been the culmination of the trends for the past 60 years have brought us to this point in time. And it's really giving birth to something very new. It's very similar to artificial intelligence. It's taken decades for us to set up all of the right circumstances to be able to actually train and build artificial intelligences. But now that all those technologies are in place, progress is moving very quickly. And it's those same core technologies that are really positioning us to change the commercial rails for everything in the world.
I've always really liked the analogy of Bitcoin being the internet of money, because it makes me think about the early internet and how none of us really could have expected how it would transform the way we communicate, the way we conduct business. And if you really think about it, if you poll anyone on the street, they probably don't know how the technology of the internet works. They probably don't understand the TCP/IP and understand it in the layers of protocols. And now that we have this open source monetary network, I really think that people don't realize how transformative it will be. And yet, maybe if we fast forward a decade, 2 decades from now, it'll just be incorporated in everyone's life. So I wanted to kind of get your outlook of the next 5, maybe 10 years with regards to this space.
Yeah, I think that the biggest impact that we're going to see is going to be this idea that these new technologies give me benefits that I haven't been able to get in normal everyday commerce, right? We tend to think about benefits like getting special discounts or special rewards or special access to things as part of loyalty programs, and we kind of don't see them as part of investing or money. But what the technologies I think are going to enable, which is going to change things so profoundly in the next few years, is that those two spheres are going to merge. And the money I have in my account and the investments I make in my portfolio are going to act like loyalty programs and unlock all sorts of benefits for me, like loyalty programs do today. And all of a sudden, that means that these investments and that money is foundational to how I live my everyday life, right? And that's where I think this concept of the Internet of Money is going to really hit people hard, because everything I do, I'm going to have enabled better because of the money I hold or the investments I hold. And it's going to become almost my pass to get me more benefits in my life. And I think once people start to see that, it will completely unlock this potential of these new technologies and these new cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, because they're going to be access mechanisms to this new world.
It's time for another quick break to hear these messages from my partners. I'm excited to share that I'm an advisor for the Orange Pill app. If you haven't downloaded this app yet, you're missing out on connecting with Bitcoiners in your area. The Orange Pill app is focused on building the social layer for Bitcoin and helping create opportunities for in-person connections and community building. You create a profile and you'll see lots of familiar faces, and then you can search for Bitcoiners and Bitcoin events based on your location. I'm geotagged in my home base, St. Louis, and I'm excited that Orange Pill app has allowed me to meet new people in my city. Come join us, use my referral code in the show notes, and start connecting today. Next up, I want to take a moment to recommend an outstanding recent book in the Bitcoin space, Bitcoin Evangelism by Brian DeMint. I've had the chance to have Brian on the show, and this is really the ultimate tool for orange pilling your friends, your family, your coworkers, and it will make you a more effective messenger for Bitcoin. We all have that story of how we disregarded Bitcoin the first time we heard about it because either the arguments weren't compelling enough or maybe they weren't framed in a way that we could easily grasp them. Think of something like trustlessness or immutability. These are concepts that now we understand as Bitcoiners, but how do you explain them simply to someone totally new in the space? Well, Bitcoin Evangelism will help you do that. It will allow you to become a Bitcoin evangelist so that we orange pill millions of new Bitcoiners in the new year. Head to the link in my show notes to buy the book today. I look forward to all the killer applications on Bitcoin that will be built over the coming years. I mean, I get really excited because I've already found products where instead of earning something like an airline mile or hotel points, I just get to earn Satoshis back, and I get so excited. And some of the companies are gamifying it to make it fun and easy for people. So it's really exciting to think about what's going to be possible in the coming years. Something else that I wanted to ask you about is the idea that this is going to be adopted also on a grander scale. You mentioned that a legacy firm like Franklin Templeton has to think like a sovereign wealth fund or institute. So talk to me about nation states adopting Bitcoin. Is that the direction that you guys also see this going in?
Well, I think you're already starting to see that, right? And you're starting to see even, this play into less developed nations wanting to play on a more equal playing field by combining some of their buying power around Bitcoin, and using that as a way to, compete more effectively with bigger companies and bigger countries and bigger economies. I think that you'll see more of that. I think also that it's going to become something that every treasury needs to hold, because portions of their business will just be facilitated more easily through Bitcoin payments than through foreign exchange conversions that need to happen to enable cross-border trade today, right? So a lot of people see a lot of promise in central bank digital currencies. And I think there will be a lot of efficiencies that get created by them, but those are going to still require all of that translation and exchange rate risk that you carry in moving from country to country, whereas a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin in every country, right? And so I do still think that the potential to see this used as the base unit of international trade exists. I think at a minimum, you're going to see it used for certain types of trade. And that means that every country is going to have to hold some reserves. And so I just see it working its way increasingly into the traditional banking ecosystem as just a foundational part of that system. And I think the question then just becomes, over time, do people start to gravitate more to something that works globally and isn't tied to any government's policies? And that, I think, we'll have to see play out. But intuitively, it feels like it absolutely could.
Right. I completely agree with you. And it's so interesting to think about that spectrum of global reserve asset that is it's resistant to hacking and being able to be taken down by any nation state, but all the way on the other side to microprocessing, micropayments, for artificial intelligence, and for us to use day to day on something like the Lightning Network. I mean, it's going to cover every single need and utility. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about just the idea of the American worker, the American dream, being able to retire someday. There are so many struggles that everyday people face today. I think Franklin Templeton does a survey, right, of American workers, the voice of the American worker. And I was just wondering if you had perspective on that, because for so many people, again, it's almost like this opt out. It's a vote that the current system it doesn't represent them and it doesn't take care of them in the way that it once did. You know, back in the 1970s, one income could afford a nice house, and now people are really struggling, especially those just entering into the workforce, graduating from school, Gen Zs, and they have trouble accumulating assets like real estate or some of these very, very pricey tech stocks. So, how important is it to really learn about this space in order to be able to achieve financial independence and security in the future?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that people don't talk about enough, I think, in this conversation, Natalie, is that it used to be that anyone who worked really had a defined benefit plan that paid them a pension.
Yeah.
And those numbers of defined benefit plans and the number of Americans covered under those defined benefit plans has been shrinking. And we've moved more and more to what we call as a defined contribution retirement planning, which means that you yourself have to put up your own money and make your own invested decisions around how to deploy that money. And I think that that has been very detrimental because it's really limited the choices that people have, right? Institutions that run big defined benefit plans can invest in alternatives, they can invest in private assets, they can invest in things that you and I as individuals really just cannot, right? So, and many people don't even have access to defined contribution plans. And so I think that that has really created a lot of this problem. And then, even if you have the defined contribution plan, it's really been limited to only stocks and bonds, which again is really keeping the potential opportunity. You only get part of the opportunity that more wealthy people and institutions get. So I think one of the real appeals of crypto and blockchain and Bitcoin has been this idea that there are now new assets that I can invest in, and no one can tell me whether I have permission to invest in them or not. I don't have a wealth gate that I need to get over to be able to invest in them. And that really has opened up opportunities for people. And I think that, you know, the people that have taken advantage of that, many of them did very well. And that
Mhm.
led to further belief that there is potential outside of the traditional pathways of asset management. That's why I'm proud of a firm like Franklin Templeton, because we see that. And instead of fighting that, we want to embrace it and bring it to as many customers as possible.
And people have done well, but we're all still really early, which is really exciting. Bitcoin's had a nice rally recently, and the spot Bitcoin ETFs haven't even been approved yet. So, do you have any take on why there's more momentum and more attention on Bitcoin now? It has outperformed every other asset this year alone.
Yeah, I think it's a few things, right? You've mentioned some of the Bitcoin itself fundamentals, which I think are key, right? I think that there's greater understanding now of some of those Bitcoin fundamentals, right? I know a lot of people can now tell me what a halving is, right? And that was
Yeah.
something that I think 4 years ago, a lot of people, probably even including myself, were still learning about. I think that there's better understanding of the fundamentals. There's been much more, I think, focus on the recovery that we've seen, right? You know, I mean, we have seen prices now more than double from the lows that you reached back in 2022. I think there's been a lot of the more egregious crypto practices that made people feel that the space was not being, you know, regulated by trustworthy people. Those things have moved on. You've seen firms like Franklin Templeton get engaged that have trust from people. But I think it's also that Bitcoin itself, the value proposition is becoming better understood. You see so much political gridlock right now in the US. You see political upheaval happening in other parts of the world. And people are like, hey, I kind of like this idea that there's something that maybe isn't tied to any specific government, that has kind of a more code driven, algorithmically driven supply schedule that I can trust and that I know is happening in a very prescribed way. So I'm not going to be caught by surprise by any big changes. And I think that, people want to have that ability to diversify where they hold their assets, and Bitcoin's value proposition itself is becoming better understood.
I wish someone had told me about Bitcoin, and I just wish someone told me about this whole space, like cryptography, economics, and how that's going to converge with technology. I would have probably majored in something related to that, although I do think my communications and journalism background has served me also in this space. I also just wanted to ask you one last question about Bitcoin, which is some people are resistant to Bitcoin because they hear the energy FUD. They hear, oh my gosh, Bitcoin mining uses too much energy. Obviously, your company must have overcome that hurdle. And there is so much research out there that's showing that Bitcoin actually incentivizes green energy and capturing stranded or wasted energy, removing some of the methane flares. So, what can you share about that aspect, which remains a hesitation for some people?
Yeah. Look, I think that, as we said, Bitcoin is very new. It's less than 15 years old. And when it started, this was not a concern or an issue, right? And now it's become a concern and an issue. And we've seen very good progress made in trying to reduce the carbon footprint and reduce the energy utilization. A couple points there. One, you mentioned, right? Bitcoin mining is actually providing a very strong use case to introduce new, better energy consuming technologies when there hasn't been a natural use case to really encourage people to make those transitions. What we're also finding is that we're seeing the new kinds of incentives coming out and people trying to increase their ability to produce clean Bitcoin and get recognized for that. So we're talking to an interesting company out of Asia that's actually giving carbon credits to Bitcoin miners when they use clean energy to be able to prove that they're using clean energy to mine their Bitcoin. And so that's something that they can attach with the Bitcoin that they sell to let people know that it's been cleanly mined Bitcoin. So I think you're starting to see the industry come up with some really interesting and innovative solutions to address those concerns. And I don't think that that will be a long-term limiting factor for Bitcoin.
I would say that energy is one of the biggest misconceptions about the space. Is there anything else? Like, if you could clear up a big myth that's out there that you've taken the time to really study and understand, what would it be? What's something that people approach you with and you're like, nope, let me actually clear that up for you?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing that people miss about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin was the first asset that has ever been able to create digital scarcity, right? And so this was a concept that nobody believed could be done, right? If I send you a picture as a JPEG, you can send that JPEG around to anyone else. And I can't say that that's a scarce resource, right? It could circulate indefinitely. But Bitcoin was able to solve that problem and actually create a new methodology where you trust that when you are given a unit of Bitcoin, it is a unique unit and no one else owns that same unit. And I think in terms of innovations, that is the most innovative thing about Bitcoin. And when people say, well, there's no value there, it doesn't represent anything, I think that people who invest in technology stocks every day, who recognize the value of innovative new technologies, when they realize that Bitcoin was the first technology to ever create digital scarcity, I
Mhm.
think that opens up a big aha moment for a lot of people.
That's well said. Well, one thing I really want to encourage is more women in this space. You are a female leader. You have a woman at the helm of Franklin Templeton. What do you think will get more women to find this space interesting and want to get involved?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I had to get over early in my career was this idea that, oh, technology is kind of a man's world and it's hard to understand technology. And I've actually found the experience to be exactly the opposite. that the women I know who get engaged and take the time to really try and understand the technology bring such a diverse set of views into how that technology can be deployed that it makes projects stronger. It makes innovation happen more rapidly, right? Don't forget, if you have people who all think the same trying to innovate, you get very little way. But when you get a diversity of views and opinions in, that's when real creativity sparks. And so getting more women engaged and giving women the confidence that they have significant value to add, that's one of the things that I personally am always trying to get women to understand, that they need our points of view because we think differently, and that needs to get reflected in the technology. And some of the insights we have are things that other people, other men aren't going to see without us there helping them to see it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I love celebrating women and the value they add by thinking differently. So it's great to see. It's really inspirational, I know, for a lot of people. Sandy, it's been great to talk to you. Is there anything else we haven't covered that you want to share, or do you have any final thoughts?
I think it's exciting, and I love how you're really bringing your enthusiasm and the ability to educate people about what's happening. And I would say, as you learn about Bitcoin and as you learn about why it's so unique, don't stop learning. There's many new innovations that Bitcoin has helped to open up, and continue down that path and learn about those newer innovations that Bitcoin helped to create and establish. And there's many more opportunities that we can talk about over the years, but I think Bitcoin really helped to unlock them. And it's really showing that it's now accreting the value that it really should be accorded to a revolutionary new asset.
Well, thank you so much, Sandy. I hope to have you back on maybe after these spot Bitcoin ETFs are approved.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for checking out the video version of my show. Remember, this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing constitutes as official investment advice, and you should always do your own research. Please reach out if you have guest suggestions or any feedback. My email is natalie@talkingbitcoin.com, and I'll see you next time.